hear from you. So, I'll be kind of flying through some of these slides, but there will be plenty of time to ask questions and have some discussion after a brief presentation. So good afternoon, I'm Linda Drake. I'm the Director of Career and College Readiness Initiatives for the State Board of Education. And we like to start with a land acknowledgement. We are connecting from the ancestral and unceded traditional lands of 29 federally recognized tribes and numerous other Native American tribes that have not received federal recognition. We give thanks to the Native American tribes who are the original and current stewards of this land and to the land itself. We acknowledge that peoples native to this land have not been well served by our educational system. We ask that you join us in our commitment to recognizing the important history of Native peoples in our state and in honoring Washington's tribes as one step towards dismantling the colonialism present in our education system. And there is a resource there if where you can check and see which traditional land your home or work occupies if you haven't checked in the past. And if you'd like to acknowledge the traditional tribal lands near your home or work, feel free to do so in the comments. So we'd also like to have you introduce yourself, if you would, in the chat. If you could put your name and location and if appropriate, your organization. And we'll also open a Zoom poll to see what who is participating today, what the role is of people on the call. Hi, Tina, Kim, Haley. Welcome, Kate and Catherine, Tom. Good afternoon, Lisa and Karen and Amy. Oa. We really appreciate you all coming. Cindy, Jenny, thank you all. I think we are getting some feedback on the poll. Let me go ahead and end the poll. It looks like we have mostly school level educators, followed by district level educators. So thank you all for participating today. We appreciate this. We need your feedback on work that the State Board has been doing. So the alignment work of the State Board started this year. The State Board was authorized by the legislature to submit recommendations on aligning current graduation requirements with the state profile of a graduate. And then make recommendations that could include changes to core and subject area requirements and improvements to the high school and beyond plan and graduation pathway options. This is a sort of a brief overview of the timeline of the work. The board reviewed current graduation requirements and started engaging with stakeholders from January to July. In July, the board developed draft recommendations and engaged with students, educators, and partner organizations. And now we're in the October to December timeframe where we're finalizing recommendations and seeking engagement with you all on our draft recommendations. And then come December, the the board will report our recommendations to the legislature. The engagements with stakeholders has included listening sessions, meeting with partner organizations at events and meetings. We have a survey that is open right now. We're seeking your feedback in this listening session, but you're also welcome if you don't feel that you've had a chance to fully share your views, or if you leave this listening session and think more about it and have more to add, please use the survey. I know some folks are also wanting to be blunt and honest, and if it feels like you could do that better if you were anonymous, probably the survey is the way to go. I'll also in a minute be sharing Padlet where you can give feedback, but if you are already a Padlet user, then your username will show up when you leave a comment there. So if you'd like to be the most anonymous, then the survey is probably the best way to go. And also the state board has been engaged in 3 years of research on graduation pathway options. So this is the state profile of the graduate. It was developed by the mastery-based work group. And it's sort of, it's a broad description of the characteristics and attributes and competencies that we'd like our students to have developed by the time they graduate to help them prepare for success after high school. I'm just going to briefly over the next few slides go over the current graduation requirements really briefly. I suspect that many of the educators on the call will also know these pretty well. But these are, this is the subject area requirements. There are 7 flexible credits and then the 17 foundational or core credits. This is the current 24 credit graduation requirement framework. In addition to subject and area requirements, there are graduation pathway options. And then the third part of the high school diploma is the high school and beyond plan. And then this is the profile of the graduate. Again, our spring listening sessions and feedback from stakeholders helped us identify area where there appeared to be a mismatch and misalignment between the current graduation requirements and the profile of the graduate. And those misalignments were mainly in the area of financial literacy, cultivating physical and emotional well-being, showing cultural competency, and in applying learning. Now, in addition to developing recommendations to address each of those, and in conjunction with those recommendations, there is ongoing work of the board that I wanted to share with you because it's part of all of this alignment work. But some of this work has been going on even pre the alignment work, and that includes work on mastery-based learning. The State Board of Education is expanding current work to promote individualized student learning through a mastery-based learning grant program, and which seeks to support learning recovery, ensure school districts employ equitable mastery-based learning policies, and develop more options for students to demonstrate meeting learning standards through mastery-based learning. And then, as I mentioned, the state board was charged by the legislature to research graduation pathway options. We're in the 3rd year of research, and that has led the board to make recommendations about graduation pathways through proposed legislation. So the board right now is working on developing proposed legislation that will help clarify the purpose of graduation pathways, and also will propose a performance-based pathway and a work-based pathway. Now, I wanted to gather information from you all, and we'd like to do this through an online application called Padlet. You can access a Padlet for this meeting through the link. And thank you, Jay Lee. Jay Lee has put a link to the Padlet in chat, and then you can also access it with your phone using the symbol on the screen. So let us know when if you're able to connect with Padlet, great. If you have any issues, let us know in the chat. The way I'll stop sharing for a second and show you what the Padlet looks like on my screen. So once you get to the Padlet, it should look like this. And I've set up the Padlet so that each of the recommendations, the draft recommendations that we are working on refining to propose to the legislature in our draft recommendation report, they're organized under the general broad areas of the graduation profile, the profile of the graduate. So the first, so there are different columns here that represent the different areas of the profile. And the Padlet allows you both to rate a draft recommendation and to leave a comment. So please feel free to do both. And I will continue talking about our recommendations as you get a chance to work through the Padlet. So I hope you all were able to link to the Padlet. Let us know if you need any help with that. So you can rate it, and please, in the comments, let us know what you think of the recommendation. Do you have any concerns about the recommendation? What would it take to make the recommendation successful? So now I'm going to go really briefly through each of these recommendations. The first is to support the work of the financial education public-private partnership and help build capacity for districts to offer high-quality financial education to all students. This was the most commonly mentioned need or gap between the profile and current graduation requirements that was identified by students and parents in our spring listening sessions. The next most commonly mentioned thing that was a particular concern to students was a desire to have more learning about mental health. I think there was a desire both for mental health services and mental health learning. And so one of our draft recommendations is to create more flexibility in physical education and health to allow for more mental health content. And this desire for more mental health content actually predated the pandemic, but the pandemic certainly made the call for this more intense among students that we talked to. In addition, parents, students, and counselors were interested and in greater uniformity in the application of the waiver or excusal of physical education. So currently, locally, districts and schools are able to waive or excuse physical education or participation in a physical education course. Currently, there is still a requirement that students have learning in the physical education learning standards. So OSPI does have a mastery competency assessment for the physical education learning standards, but there's still a lot of variability in how this waiver excusal of physical education is implemented around the state. So we are recommending that there be work on making that more, more uniform through a state policy. Next, there are recommendations that sort of fall under the broad category of embracing differences and diversity and showing cultural competency. The first draft recommendation in this category is to ensure districts implement the since time immemorial curriculum. This has been a requirement of districts since about 2015, but there is some flexibility in when districts actually implement the curriculum. So we would like to create a timeline for making sure the districts implement. We'd like to partner with advocates to build coalition on the implementation of ethnic studies. We'd like to support English language learners in meeting graduation requirements by allowing English language learners to meet world language graduation requirements when taking English language arts courses. And then in conjunction with that, increase opportunities for all students to earn the seal of biliteracy by promoting the adoption of district policies and ensuring English language learners are evaluated for earning the seal of biliteracy. The recommendation for focusing on learning standards rather than on seat time helps support and works in conjunction with mastery-based learning and interdisciplinary learning. We'd like to improve the high school transcript to support better reporting of mastery-based learning and multidisciplinary learning and include more detail on how exactly graduation requirements are met. And then we'd like to improve the high school and beyond plan through state support for a limited number of online platforms that would improve uniformity and portability for students. This recommendation is actually originated from the Superintendent of Public Instruction, and we will support the work of the Superintendent in advancing improvements to the high school and beyond plan. All right, and then on the Padlet, we also have a column for the pathways. So we would encourage you to add your thoughts on our proposed legislation to add a performance-based pathway and a work-based pathway, and on clarifying the purpose of graduation pathways. And then we also have a column for general questions. Do you have suggestions for topics for additional recommendations? Have we hit on your main concerns? Do you have other concerns besides these that you would like to see recommendations? And are there other aspects of the current graduation requirements that you would want changed? And in general, is the board on the right track with these recommendations? So I really appreciate you for joining this listening session. If you have, if you are a representative of another organization and would like us to visit a meeting, have me come to a meeting, talk about this alignment work and gather feedback from any organizations you're involved with, I would really appreciate hearing from you, and we would certainly try and make it to any meetings where their stakeholders would like to give us feedback. And then finally, again, there is our alignment survey. So that's the end of my presentation. So I think I'm going to stop sharing and we can have some questions and answers. We are a relatively small group. We have under 30 attendees. So I think it would be pretty easy to engage in some back and forth. So if you are, so as you work on Padlet, if you'd like to be unmuted, we can unmute you and you can give us comments or ask questions. I see in the comments, Kim has a question about what is the bridge between a new transcript structure and the relationship with NCAA and college course requirements. And that is a really good question. I think that the I think that transcript issues are always of interest to higher ed. We would want to make sure that we work closely with higher ed on any changes that are made to the transcript. I think that the goal of making the transcript clearer and more clear about how students actually earn their credits would be something that the higher that institutions of higher education would be interested in. And I think the NCAA is wants to make sure that college course requirements are being met. So I'm not sure that, we would just be very, very collaborative with higher ed in making sure that any changes to the transcript work with their admissions. And I think that if it's okay with higher ed, probably it's okay with NCAA.
Yeah, we just ran into a situation where state course codes and things are not always current. And so when you have sometimes this push and pull, or if you use a pass or in an alternative education setting, and they have a course that's 1.5 credits because it's master based and it covers 3 different areas. I just was wondering if there's been discussion on how you might manage that.
That is a really good point. So I don't know that there has been a lot of discussion, at least I'm not aware of it. They may be going on, but that is probably a good thing to pursue, is to talk to the NCAA at some point and make sure that they realize that this mastery-based work is going on. Mastery-based work does not change the learning standards. Mastery-based learning is all about meeting the same learning standards as traditional courses. And so it is possible to transcribe mastery-based learning in a way that looks very similar to traditional coursework, but we also want flexibility there. So I think you make a really good point. Tina asked about when we finish the Padlet, how do you submit it? It's submitted already. When you put your comments in, we will be able to keep this Padlet and be able to look at your comments. I think when you enter a comment, you do. I'm sorry. Let me make sure that that's the case. Once you've entered a comment, then it's on Padlet, and if you can see it, then we can see it. Amy has a question. Amy, I see that would you like to unmute?
Hey there.
Hi.
So my question I also put in the chat, and this is a pretty targeted question, so I don't know if you have the answer, but I'm just curious as to why the opportunity was removed for our students who experience the most severe impacts of their disability to receive a CIA if they choose the pathway of the state assessment, which is the most appropriate form of that is the WAAIM alternate assessment fee engagement rubric. It just seems like we're moving backwards by taking away those opportunities and not embracing the differences and diversity of those students who experience severe impacts of their disability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, well, the legislature actually removed both the CIA and the CAA. That's the Certificate of Individual Achievement and the Certificate of Academic Achievement. Those were both removed by the legislature and replaced with pathways. So overarching, that's the reason why the CIA went away. Now the WAAIM is still.
So why would it not
pathway.
Just right? But so there's another level of that for those students that are experiencing the most severe impacts of their disability. It's a very small number of students, I would say. throughout, and I work for one of the biggest districts in the state. It's a pretty small number for us. So I recognize that it's probably a pretty small number throughout the state. And so this is a adapted version of the WAAIM that measures strictly levels of engagement. I understand taking away CIA and CAA, and if they're going to give those, if they're going to allow WAAIM to be a pathway, which is great, then they should also consider adding back the engagement rubric.
Okay.
It's really tricky. It's really there's a lot of special education language in there, right? But it was really surprising to us when that opportunity was taken away. When there's a very, very, very specific set of qualifications that students need to meet that would qualify to take the engagement rubric. Yeah, it was just really disappointing. It feels pretty discriminatory, and like their work doesn't matter. They earned the same credits, and they're able to. This is just how they're able to show competence in those areas. So, yeah, it's really disappointing. So I'm hoping we can have some further discussion around that.
All right. Yes, I think I see your issue now. If you want to email me, that would probably be good. If I'm not that familiar with the engagement rubric, so I think I could use some more information.
Awesome. I work pretty closely with Tony Wheeler. So I don't know if you work with Tony. She's the state alternate assessment coordinator. So
Okay.
I'd love to meet with you all and talk about how we can fix this. So.
Okay. Thank
Linda,
you for bringing up that issue.
I'll just jump into just really quickly to say that one thing that does come through in the research we've done so far is that it's pretty clear that there's a lot of concern about whether the pathways serve students who are receiving special ed services, and that's a weakness in the current framework of the pathways. And actually, when these passed, there was a lot of testimony to that effect as well, that there was real concern that this was going to be creating an additional burden on those, or a barrier for those students. And SBE and others kind of testified to that point, but it is a legislative decision and the solution is legislative.
Thank you, Randy. Does anyone else have comments, questions, want to share any concerns? Feel free to raise your hand and we can unmute you. Thank you all. I'm looking at the Padlet and I see some rating and some comments. Thank you for filling those out. Let's see. I wonder if, okay, Amy, I'm wondering if pathway waivers could be an option for those students in last year's cohort and this year's cohort, since it sounds like it is in the legislators' hands. There is a waiver of pathways, the emergency waiver for pathways, as well as for up to 2 subject area credits. The emergency waiver is in place for this year, similar to last year. It can be waived for individual students who have been impacted by the pandemic. I'd say almost all our students were impacted by the pandemic. So the waiver can be applied this year. For students graduating next year, waiver will be is less expansive. It will allow for a waiver of 1 credit, and the pathway waiver will no longer be available. So this is the last year that the waiver of the pathway is available under the emergency waiver. Next year, there will not be a waiver of pathways available. So this is a year when all those students who are able to meet a pathway should be encouraged to attempt to meet a pathway, because next year, those students graduating next year will not, and in subsequent years will not have access to the emergency waiver. Yeah, Annie, it's a little confusing because the emergency waiver applies by the year in which a student graduates and not necessarily the graduation cohort. So the emergency waiver applies to all students graduating so the emergency waiver for this year applies to all students graduating in this year, no matter what cohort they're in. Students in the graduating classes of 2020 and beyond may access the emergency waiver. That was specified in the legislation. So if you still have a student from the class of, say, 2019, unfortunately, they don't have an access to the waiver. If you have a student who wants to graduate early, say a student in the class of 2023 who wants to graduate in 2022, they may use the emergency waiver to waive the pathway, but not the credits. So, so the emergency waiver does go by the graduating year, but not the graduating cohort. So if a student in the class of 2023 takes an additional year to graduate, do they become considered part of the class of 2024? They remain in the same cohort, so their basic graduation requirements are associated with their cohort class of 2023, but they would only have access to the emergency waiver that is available for the class of 2024. So there is a potential danger to students who are trying to graduate this year. If they need an additional year to graduate, they will no longer have access to the same emergency waiver if they graduate in the class of 2024. If they graduate in the academic year of 2024. And thank you for dropping my email in there, Stephanie. Let's see, I was wondering, I don't want to put you on the spot, but Jaylee or Randy, I wondered if you would be able to give an update on the pathway proposal.
Sure, no problem. So at the board's September retreat a couple of weeks ago, the board approved agency request legislation to expand graduation pathway options. And I think, let me put this link in chat again to a slide deck that summarizes what that proposal covers. But Linda mentioned this earlier in her presentation that the state board has a request around this. And what it would do is clarify the purpose of graduation pathways, specifically clarifying what demonstrates readiness means. We know that the pathways are designed to provide students with multiple ways to demonstrate their readiness in furtherance of their individual goals for after high school. So demonstrate readiness would be defined as the student is able to apply learning standards in English, language arts, and math, or in 2 or more core subject areas that most directly align with the student's goals. So this would potentially open up to pathway options that go beyond math and ELA focus and allow the student to design a customized pathway that aligns better with their goals for after high school. And it would combine 2 or more core subject areas, and those include English, math, science, social studies, health and fitness, arts, and career and technical education. So that's one part of the proposal. And then it would add 2 new graduation pathway options. One of them is a performance-based pathway, which would allow the student to complete a performance-based learning experience where they apply knowledge and skills in a real-world context, providing evidence of applying state learning standards in at least 2 mandatory core subject areas most directly aligned with their goals. And this could take a variety of forms. So it could be a project, a practicum, a cultural activity, for example, and it could result in a variety of products that can be evaluated, such as a performance, a presentation, a portfolio, report, film, or exhibit. But in order to qualify as the graduation pathway, it would need to meet state requirements set in the state board's rules regarding the safety and quality of the learning experience and the assessment criteria for determining the student has applied the learning standards. And then evaluation of the student's performance could include community members or professionals, but it must include at least 1 certificated teacher who's endorsed in each relevant subject area. And then the school district has to adopt their local policy explaining how they're meeting those state level requirements before they can offer this pathway. So that's one of the pathway options. And then the second option that the proposal would add is a work-related pathway. This would allow a student to complete a work-related learning experience where they're applying the learning standards in at least 2 subject areas that most directly align with their goals. And this could include paid or unpaid work experience, community service, internship, apprenticeship, or pre-apprenticeship, and must meet the same framework of state level requirements as for the performance-based pathway. So again, it would have to meet state level requirements regarding the safety and quality of the learning experience and the assessment criteria for determining the student has applied the learning standards. And the school district would have to adopt a local policy before offering it. So those are 2 new graduation pathway options that the board is proposing that should be created. And this is in the form of a legislative request that we have submitted to the governor's office for review. Excuse me. And so that's the stage where it's at in the process. And then if approved by the governor's office, then we could move forward with finding a bill sponsor and hopefully see this introduced in the upcoming legislative session. And then, it would go through that legislative process. So it's still, just a proposal at this point, but wanted to share that with you to let you know what might be on the horizon.
Thank you, Jaylee. And then if folks want to keep track of that, we have a legislative web page, right?
Yes, I can put the link in chat.
Thank you. All right, any other addition? Do you have any questions about the proposal? If you have any questions about the pathway proposal, let us know. And then also, if you have any additional questions or comments, please raise your hand or let us know in chat. All right, well, thank you all so much for coming and sharing your thoughts. It looks like the number of comments has decreased both in chat and on the Padlet. So I think it'd be fine to let you have some time back in your day. Again, once again, thank you so much. We really appreciate feedback on these proposed recommendations.